interrupt the Mint Fresh Toothpaste musical review with this bulletin from the WPOD News Wire. Dateline, Chicago. The Windy City's dwarf gumshoe, Billibob Baddins, has gotten more than he bargained for while investigating the death of gangster Anthony Pretty Boy DeMaio at the behest of socialite Julia Lessinger. This case has not only revealed the presence of a dangerous talisman of unimaginable power, but true natures of the people implicated in this item's whereabouts as well. On Billibob's return trip to the Ryerson Library, a conversation with museum curator Dr. Samuel Hamill turned completely out of control as the mousy, reserved academic blindsided Billy with a well-placed sucker punch. The night ended with one dead curator, a recovering dwarf, and murder charges dropped thanks to an appearance by Capone's ace attorney, Michael Ahern. And now you know the story so far. We return you to our regularly scheduled programming here on WPOD Chicago.
Chapter 11. Give my regards to Elliot. Thursday, I woke up feeling like I'd gnawed too deep into a Griffinos woods boar. Certain cuts of the meat can give you the runs for weeks. Thanks to his truth serum experiment, the doc had left me a parting gift in the form of a hangover that just wouldn't lift, no matter how many home remedies I threw at it. So I phoned up Miranda and talked her into taking a day off. Why not? I certainly was. The next day, I woke up to the sight of Chicago's street sweepers being given a power assist from the forces of nature. The rhythmic pip-pip-pips of raindrops straight from the everlasting fields, giving sidewalks, passing cars, and brownstones a brilliant silver sheen, even though the sun remained shielded behind its armor of steel-gray clouds. Yeah, snobby as they are, those elves possessed a way of polishing their armor that made them glow even in a moonless night. Problem was, it made them easy targets. This morning, while enjoying my morning coffee, I idly turned the pages of both the Daily Tribune and Herald Examiner. Apart from yesterday's tiny blurb on a freak accident at the Ryerson that claimed the life of its curator, Dr. Samuel Hamill, there was no investigation or even an inquiry planned. Guess that slick suit of Capone's covered all the bases, making sure the cops and the museum security stayed tight-lipped about me, so I could work free and clear of any unwanted press. Nice to have friends in low places, I guess. The clean scent in the air took me back to bright spring days in Griffinos, when my mother would come in with our clothes, sun-dried and smelling of the fresh outdoors. In 1929 Chicago, this scent was seasoned with car exhaust, a couple of nearby bakeries, and the uncovered trash can or two. But it was still a waxing poetic moment, so I enjoyed it for what it was. Sadly, this innocent euphoria wouldn't last. "Billy?" Miranda asked, rapping lightly on the door to my office. "Yeah," I asked over my shoulder, still enjoying the sound of the rain. "You got visitors." I turned from the open window to stare at two extremely tall, square-jawed gents, whose faces were devoid of enthusiasm for the simple pleasures of the morning. Matching their nondescript personalities were their dark charcoal gray suits, hardly the tailored cuts of Capone's boys, or even Moran's. They also didn't sport the hard look of a typical mobster that boasted they could walk into a bar fight with an average orc and win. These guys, from the looks of them, couldn't intimidate an orc, cave troll, or mountain dragon. Then it hit me. These were the same suits I had the staring contest with at Benny's crime scene, and then caught nosing around his flop later on. The awkward silence was finally broken with one of them asking me,
"Mr. Baddins?"
Now there's an original introduction. Last time I checked, yeah. These guys didn't work for Chicago's finest. O'Malley's Flatfeet would have made themselves thoroughly at home by now, checking behind all the pictures for hidden booze or some other contraband to add to their private stashes. These suits just stood there, silently looking the room over until finally their eyes came back to me. I merely crossed my arms with a wry grin If they wanted posturing, then by the fates, I'd give 'em posturing. So, who you suits working for? Treasury Department? Bureau of Alcohol Violations?
I'm sorry, Mr. Baddins,
The lead suit replied stiffly.
but I'm not at liberty to discuss what organization we're affiliated with.
The military. Definitely. Okay, Army or Navy? I inquired, laughing gruffly as they shared a nervous look between them. Look, guys, I'm former infantryman. I know the talk. I also know if you wanted to come here and give me a good old-fashioned bare-knuckles interrogation, you could do so and have the United States government backing you in the name of freedom and preservation of liberty. How about you cut me a break and let me know who your boss is in Washington, D.C., and I'll tell you whatever you want to know. From the way the square jaws looked at me, and then back to each other, it was really clear they found it hard to believe that someone like me had served in the armed forces anywhere. It was also really clear that they didn't know how to handle me. They reminded me of how the mountain trolls crossed with elves, creating an elvish breed taller, stronger, and denser than your usual elf. The resulting mountain elves looked as if they possessed all the answers to Acryonis' deepest, darkest secrets, but they would have problems crossing a forest footpath just to reach the other side. The military was interested in a mook like Benny Roletto? It couldn't be for past service to his country. Benny was the type of dink who would make certain if his boys were charging into a fight, he would be there, right behind them, every step of the way. Way behind them. The lead mountain elf finally spoke up again, producing a thin billfold from his coat pocket.
My name is Jackson. My partner here is Miller. We are with the Department of War.
Department of War. Still enjoying their victory from the Great War, looking into the gangland wars of Chicago. Well, don't that just beat all? Their identification papers appeared legit, but what really sealed the deal were the imitation leather billfolds. Definitely U.S. government all the way. Department of War. Okay then. You boys have any rank there?
I'm sorry, Mr. Baddins.
Jackson replied in the identical manner to which he had a moment ago.
I'm not at liberty to discuss what rank I hold in the department we're affiliated with.
I see. Oh boy, were these guys stealing the wind out of my barge's sails. I was all ready to offer them a drink, from military man to military men. I could already hear the reply.
I'm sorry, Mr. Baddins, but I'm not at liberty to imbibe any contraband, as it is against the regulations of the organization we are affiliated with.
Neither of them wanted to be in my office, although it was not evident in Jackson's face as it was in Miller's. As a matter of fact, Miller looked downright pissed. It wouldn't surprise me at all if a single nod from Jackson was keeping Miller at bay like some angry warhound. How can I help you, gentlemen? I asked pleasantly as I leapt into my office chair.
We understand you were in contact with a Dr. Samuel Hamill of the Ryerson Library last week.
Jackson began, his voice lacking anything remotely resembling spontaneity. He knew exactly what to ask and how to ask it, and he was looking to walk away with all the answers.
2 nights ago, he died in a bizarre accident that apparently involved you.
I was there. As far as my being involved, that is a matter of perspective. He watched me in silence for a few moments, maybe mulling over the flash of attitude I'd just thrown his way.
Mr. Baddins,
He continued,
we are very curious as to what a private investigator's interest is in the curator of the Ryerson.
I'm a patron of the arts. I smiled, leaning back in my chair.
Mr. Baddins, we do not appreciate your levity with us.
Well, since we're both military types in suits now, let me be frank with you. I don't appreciate you two coming into my office and asking questions about my business. Read the door, because it says what I do for a living. If you don't like it, then scram. Miller stepped forward, but Jackson stopped him with a look. As they continued to stare me down, I began to wonder whether they were trying to establish their dominance over me or working up the nerve to ask me out on a date. Did they want me to enlist? Did they want me to fart the Star-Spangled Banner? If they came back after Mick's lunch special, I'd be happy to oblige. I really didn't have time for an old-fashioned elvish standoff. All right, boys, how about we have a trade-off of information? You tell me the sudden interest the War Department has taken with the Ryerson Museum's recently departed curator, and I'll try to answer your questions within the scope that my profession allows. They could have arrested me and dragged me into a setting a little less familiar and friendly to find out what they wanted to know. They were the U.S. government, after all. Fortunately for me, they decided to play by my tavern rules.
Our intelligence operatives intercepted a communique concerning an archaeological dig in the deserts of Egypt.
Jackson began.
This team, sponsored by the Ryerson Museum, discovered an item cataloged under the identification number EW234450-112-MM. Dr. Hamill informed us that this was a sword of ancient origin and that it apparently was stolen from the Ryerson before it could be properly cataloged for the museum's inventory. It was also apparent Dr. Hamill thought you possessed in-depth knowledge of said item number EW234450-112-MM.
Ah, how the military loved their numbers. The pencil pushers, anyway. I preferred the actual point of the military as opposed to the regulations of administration and formalities of ceremony. Just hand me a sharpened battle axe or a nice thick-headed mace and point to where you want me to charge. To me, that was the military. Another very military thing was the amount of information they had for theft that the Ryerson was keeping under wraps. I didn't doubt for a moment the government's ability, and their justification in doing so, to intercept a communique between an archaeological dig in Egypt and an institution in the U.S. The details these government employees had seemed to be originating from the dig itself. No doubt a bizarre artifact surfacing in sands outside of Cairo must have caught their attention. They tracked the sword from the desert to the museum, and now they were wondering why it hadn't been revealed to the public as some sort of exhibit. Then I showed up. First, on a crime scene, and then at the Ryerson. A dwarf in the middle of all this oddity? I wondered how long they'd been casing my ass. Well, yeah, as you can see, I said, motioning to my weapons mounted on the wall, I have an interest in ancient weapons and artifacts. Safe to say, I've got a lot of hands-on experience with them.
We also understand that you relieved Dr. Hamill of a photograph of item number EW234450-112-MM and kept it for an unspecified period of time.
And like a peacock that held full reign over a courtyard leading to a king's palace, both Jackson and Miller arched their backs ever so slightly to give themselves a hint more height. I know that trick well.
We are here on matters of national security to collect your data concerning number EW234450-112-MM.
And they did their little posturing maneuver together again. How cute. I bet these government dinks do everything together. I was trying really hard not to snicker because I knew they could, if given the green light from the White House, tear up my office without so much as a worry for my individual rights. Power is power, regardless of what freedoms are promised to people. All it would take to turn me from Billibob Baddins' private eye to Billibob Baddins' enemy of the state was a single phone call to the great ivory palace of the East. Still, that didn't mean I had to blindly roll over and play dead for these clowns. I gave the photo back to Hamill already. So if you guys flash your badges to the Ryerson or the Chicago police, I'm sure they'll grant you two access to whatever you want. As far as access to my personal notes, I'm afraid that is classified.
Classified?
Yeah, classified, I echoed Jackson. I knew that's a word you two would understand. There are already 2 deaths that I know of linked to item EW234 blah blah blah. That's enough blood spilled for my taste. So I've got my notes stored away in a safe place so that no one else will come to harm. I then leaned forward, slowly lacing my fingers together. As far as turning over my own personal notes without question, that gets a little complicated.
Complicated?
I paused for a moment, looking at Jackson as if he had suddenly grown a third arm from his forehead. You should change your last name to Canyon. It suits you better. He didn't get the joke. I didn't expect him to. My own notes are linked with a case, I went on, and because I am a private investigator, it really would not do a lot for business if I went and released my findings to anyone, even old Uncle Whiskers himself.
Watch your step, Shorty.
Well, what do you know? Miller had a voice.
You're working with the G here, and we don't take kindly to that kind of talk.
Where'd you hear that tough guy talk, G-Man? Listening faithfully to True Detective Mysteries, are we? Miller's beady eyes narrowed. If these boys were Alphonse's or Bug's crew, they would be taking me for a one-way scenic ride through the more rural spots in Illinois by now, and I wouldn't be making the fitting I had scheduled at Sergio's after lunch. No, these guys wanted to keep a low profile, and for good reason. Because Chicago was creeping up more and more in the trouble department lately, the feds were now poking their noses into business that local law enforcement couldn't handle. While mobsters were able to deal with local cops, easily adding them to the business expenses of the operation, the feds were gumming up the works with reps like Elliot Ness. Apparently, Ness had recruited himself a sharp little team, all of them following the same codes and edicts of refusing bribes and remaining out of the organization's influence. I hope those untouchables are as squeaky clean as their press makes them out to be. As Jackson cleared his throat to speak, the sound seemed to give the invisible chain connected to Miller's neck a bit of a tug. Not too much, though. The dink still wanted my head as his pike ornament.
I don't think you understand the present situation, Mr. Baddins. We are not requesting information from you. We are merely extending a courtesy in telling you that you will hand over all information concerning Ryerson's missing item, number EW234450-112-MM.
When you're dealing with dwarves, the best way to completely shut down the negotiation channels is to make demands. Never tell dwarves that they are going to do something, because whether you insinuate it or not, we will add "or else" on the end. I have seen peace negotiations degenerate into barroom brawls simply because the party opposite the dwarves worded their terms as "you will do this" or "you will do that." And so the rumor, probably started up by the elves, grew that dwarves are rude little twerps at treaty talks. Really? I countered. Then how about I extend to the Department of War a little courtesy of my own? If any agent of the Department of War, or any other United States government agency for that matter, attempts to relieve Griffinos-born dwarf and United States citizen Billibob Baddins of any information he is not willing to part withal, then said dwarf cannot and will not be held responsible for damages or injury to the government agents in question. This was the challenge Miller had been waiting for. As he leaned over my desk, tipping his charcoal gray fedora back to the top of his head, I could make out the Roscoe under his now unbuttoned jacket. While I mentally painted the bullseye exactly where my fist would do the most damage to that square jaw of his, I sent the High Warrior and his second a prayer that tough guy Miller was going where I hoped he would.
That sounds like a threat, Shorty.
He rested his fist gently against my desk.
You threatening us? You threatening Uncle Sam?
I had to give this ogre some credit. Every time his mouth opened, another line from some dime store detective magazine came out. For a government agent, that's talent. It isn't a threat, tough guy. I smiled. Like you said before, it's a courtesy.
Really? Well, maybe we should dig deeper. Maybe we shouldn't just take your classified notes, but everything here. Find out exactly what brought this courtesy on.
Miller looked over at my battle axe and warhammer and gave a nod to them both.
I think I'll start with these trophies of yours over here. They look dangerous.
As Miller strode over to my former tools of the trade as if he were the herald returning with the enemy's surrender, I nodded to myself in satisfaction. Apparently, my prayer had been heard. "Hey, Miranda," I shouted, causing Miller to freeze in mid-step. "Make the call." Just as I heard Miranda pick up the phone and ask for a connection, Miller's hand touched the handle of my battle axe. My charmed battle axe. This weapon was forged by the best in the business, a big, burly dwarf by the name of Dursley Dinglehorf. This guy crafted one-of-a-kind battle axes that could slice through metal armor like a knife through warm butter. Once Dursley finished this little gem of a weapon for me, I took it to a wizard whose forte was casting charms for weapons, and asked him to give my battle axe something that would make it work for me instead of against me. Let me just say that I've got to be damn more careful what I ask for from a friggin' mage. The old coot took my request literally and charmed the axe with a spell that prevented anyone else to wield it, outside of yours truly. This way, no one could use it against me. Not what I expected, but a handy charm nonetheless. As I was saying, Miller's hand touched the leather-wrapped handle, just long enough for him to feel the tanned animal hide against his own fingertips. As I watched him fly across my office and through the frosted window that separated my office from Miranda's reception area, I remembered how my pal Kev had described being on the other end of my battle axe's charm. Once, when he and I were well into our kegs of malt beer, I dared him to try and take my battle axe from me. When he landed on solid ground and sat up, laughing in a drunken stupor, but also grasping his ribs, he described a sensation of being back-kicked by a pack beast in a very bad mood. Now, Kev was a big guy. Though not as big as tough guy G-Man now landing in front of Miranda's desk with a hard crash. If I remembered correctly, Kev managed to walk away with a couple of broken ribs. I had no doubt Miller had the wind knocked out of him, but chances were good he'd just be sore as hell for the weekend. "Hello, Mr. McWilliams? It's Miranda over at Baddins Investigations." She nodded. "Yeah, someone touched the wall decor again," she called through the open hole that once separated her from my office. "Who does he bill this time?" Jackson turned back at me, his pistol out and pointing down at me. I was still at my desk, fingers laced and smiling wide at the somewhat befuddled government agent. I had made my point. There was no need to bring Beatrice or even her little sister into this standoff. The Department of War, Washington, D.C. I sat back in my office chair, giving my beard a few strokes. I took a moment to wonder what was running through that highly militarized mind of Mr. Jackson's. This grain-fed human knew nothing of magic, necromancers, and charmed weapons. How could Jackson, who accepted only what regulations and training had taught him, possibly reason his way through this display of sorcery before him? I shrugged. "Go ahead. Shoot me. Shoot Miranda to cover all your tracks if you need to, but you can tear up this office and still not find any more answers to the questions you and your crew are asking. How about you lower that heater of yours, and we talk like a couple of military types?" Jackson was really working the brain muscle pretty hard. On one hand, he really wanted to check up on his bullheaded partner. At the same time, he didn't want to turn his back on me for a second. The poor sap really didn't have a clue what I was going to do next, or what I was capable of. As far as Miranda knew, this was just a booby trap I'd rigged up in my office in case anyone tried to pinch my weapons. "So where is it?" Miranda would ask me. My reply was always, "You won't see it coming." And that was good enough for her. I figured the booby trap story would be easier for her to swallow than explaining how my battle axe's charm worked. "Hey, Miranda," I asked, casually taking my eyes off of Jackson. Not like he really wanted to take a chance and lay a finger on anything else in the office, present company included. "How's our pal looking out there?" "He's moving. Not much, though." "Give Dr. Roberts a call." I turned back to Jackson and picked up my desk lighter. "He's across the street. He'll give your boy Miller the once-over and be discreet about it. Now, you've got to make a choice here, Agent Jackson. What's it going to be?" He slowly returned his piece back to his shoulder holster, and I masked a relieved sigh by stretching across my desk for the pipe tree. I packed the bowl with fresh tobacco from a nearby box. Savoring the sweet mixture of leaf and earth in my bowl that I'd just ignited, I blew out a smoke ring with the second puff. Jackson wasn't impressed. Now, Mr. Jackson, I'm not one for being told what I'm going to do. I'm my own boss, and I answer to only one person. Me. You try to muscle your way through my office, case files, and personal details, and you got one seriously pissed off dwarf on your hands. I extended a courtesy to you and Miller, and I'm real sorry that Miller took the header through my window. This friendly meeting didn't have to play out like that, you know? I conceded with a long drag from my ornate pipe. But as you witnessed with my battle axe, I've got a handle on matters like Ryerson's missing artifact, the Singing Sword. A much easier name referring to it, wouldn't you agree?
That may be the way you understand the situation, Mr. Baddins, but you have no idea what you're getting yourself into.
Really? I fought back a laugh. I was just thinking it's your War Department that's stumbling into a dungeon without a torch and a clue. I slid a pen across my desk. It stopped by a blank memo pad. So how about we educate one another? I'll give you a better idea of what exactly was stolen from the Ryerson Library, and you tell me why the United States military is so interested in this trinket. I watched Jackson consider the offer on the table, silently considering what would be safe to talk about with me, and what should remain under Uncle Sam's red, white, and blue top hat. After a moment or two of getting comfortable in the seat across from my desk, he finally spoke.
Since the cessation of hostilities in Europe, we've been keeping a close eye on developments overseas.
Not a bad thing to do. I know you guys had your hands full with the cleanup and all.
In every war, you have a losing side, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I replied, a bitterness forming in my mouth. All part of war.
As you are a civilian and unfamiliar with the aftermath of a war, Mr. Baddins, I don't expect you to truly understand the reconstruction of a nation. Germany has been slow in putting itself back together since the end of the war. These past few years, however, have shown developments requiring our attention. There is this fringe party that appears to be pushing somewhat radical platforms. The followers of this movement seem to have very particular, if not peculiar, attitudes towards race, politics, and national pride. According to the limited intelligence we've gathered, their party leader is a charismatic individual, harping on the vision of what Germany was in its heyday.
He ended with a scoff. I'd keep an eye on this guy then, I replied. Take it from me, when all you have left is pride, you can build a lot more than a nation. That wiped the ignorant smirk off his face. Not bad for a civilian, eh, Jackson? So what does all this have to do with the Singing Sword?
Our intelligence also reports that this individual shows a preoccupation with historical artifacts of a supernatural nature.
Now it was my turn to scoff, listening to him try and explain the Singing Sword in terminology he could understand. Historical artifacts of a supernatural nature. Jackson looked away for a moment.
Do you read the papers, Mr. Baddins?
In my business, you got to.
Do you recall in last week's paper an article concerning the Smithsonian?
Ah, the Smithsonian. An institution of higher learning that would make a bard, mage, cleric, and sage alike clap with glee and believe it was Christmas every day. While the Ryerson was the gem of Chicago's academia, the Smithsonian was considered the gem of the whole country. The kind of place that had everything under one roof. And when I say everything, I mean everything. Yeah, I know the place. Was thinking about taking PS-35 out there for a field trip. You know, do my good deed for the local kiddies here. Nope. Still no rise or reaction from Jackson. He was a tough crowd in himself.
Do you recall a story about its temporary closing to the public for cataloging new artifacts?
He asked. Yeah, buried in the national news section. Not much to tell. I pushed myself free of my desk and hopped out of the chair as I watched old Doc Roberts arrive with his trusty black bag in hand. He took one look at Miller and then looked over at me with a hint of a scowl. For a second, I thought I was going to get a scolding. Instead, I got a rueful shake of his silver-haired head as he knelt by the groaning patient. Chances were I'd get an earful from the doc at the next change of the seasons, when my knee always acted up. I returned my attentions to the dink in my office. As I recall, the article was to inform tourists and the like that if they were going to D.C., they'd better not plan a visit to the Smithsonian. Since Jackson was seated, we were seeing eye to eye. His voice dropped to a level only I could hear.
What the article didn't report were the murders of several Smithsonian staff.
I took my pipe out and cast a casual glance at Miranda, who caught it better than Kiki Collier out in right field. My girl struck up a conversation with Doc Roberts. The doc needed to be preoccupied, not only with his patient, but with her as well. It was for privacy's sake. A bit of a challenge right now on account of Miller's quick flight through my office window. I motioned with my head for Jackson to join me by the window. The rain still came down steadily, the pip-pippity-pip-pap-pap symphony now giving our conversation a little cover. Several staff members, huh? I couldn't mask the surprise and confusion in my low voice. The news, if not a front-page item, should have been at least a lead story in the national news. Instead, it ran as more of a side story for the folks who read a Tribune or a Chronicle from beginning to end, and apparently the story was incomplete. How did the newswire miss that little detail behind the Smithsonian's closing?
Because, unlike you, they were cooperative.
Jackson answered.
What I'm revealing, I'm doing so with discretion. Mr. Baddins, you have given me no reason to trust you unconditionally. But with this collection you have on display here, I cannot completely dismiss your knowledge on this matter. I will warn you that if these facts I share with you are made public, I will practice the same discretion in how I make you, your business, and your staff disappear.
Back to threats, are we? Jackson, I must admit, did have something that could scare the bathtub gin out of me. He had resources even Capone wouldn't be able to call on. And while Capone's displays of enforcement were usually public, messy, and downright nasty, this chump was the G. Jackson could make Baddins' investigations a front for organized crime and vilify Miranda and me to a point where the general public would scream for us to make an appearance at Chicago's answer to Executioner's Square. You know, Jackson, we got this saying for my parts. Que mach benesh fa denarg, faremach desach. Jackson looked down at me blankly. Guess his investigation into what his team labeled the supernatural didn't include translation of Dwarven dialects.
And that means?
He finally asked me. Don't screw with me, and I won't screw with you. The honest yet crass statement sounded better in my own tongue.
The murders were of 2 archaeologists and a student, all recently arrived from an archaeological dig in Greece. These gentlemen were apparently celebrating a recent discovery of lost satyr plates and rare pottery still intact. However, a communique sent a month before the incident at the Smithsonian mentioned another artifact discovered that shouldn't have been there.
Really? Why not?
At the time of the satyr plates, the Greeks wielded weaponry of a specific style and metal composition. This team came across a weapon completely different in its origin. Descriptions made it out to be crescent-shaped, no longer than a forearm. The inside angle of the weapon
kept an edge, still sharp, and let me guess, it was a brushed silver color, wasn't it? Finally, I got a reaction out of Jackson. Could have knocked him over with a dragon scale. I think he was expecting me to keep going in the description of this doohickey, but no such luck. I vaguely remembered what this unique find looked like, because I caught a glance of it before pitching it into that portal. Guess I just caught up with talisman number 2. So this boomerang of death, which these scholars and you military types knew was more prevalent in a completely different hemisphere, wound up in a dig in ancient Greece. Did those scholarly types get this trinket home?
Archaeology is not a priority of the Department of War, you understand, Mr. Baddins. We are hardly interested in clay urns and images of gladiators depicted in various forms of combat. What caught our attention was the communique our European intelligence operatives intercepted a few days before the Smithsonian incident.
No, wait, don't tell me. You can't give me the particulars of that telegram because it is considered super secret and not for the ears of civilians like me.
Correct, Mr. Baddins.
He was back to his rock demon self once again. If it weren't for the fact that he was speaking, I'd be holding a mirror under his nostrils to see if he was alive.
I can tell you the intercepted message made reference to an archaeological dig somewhere in Greece and was extremely clear in its order to obtain this artifact at all costs.
So this character you're keeping an eye on gets his jollies off of ancient good luck charms? Do you have any real evidence this political party was behind the murders?
We have evidence that this political party not only carried out the murders, but have some sort of inside advisor who is currently assisting them in their investigation of these said artifacts.
I shook my head amid a cloud of pipe smoke. Now, why are you doing this to me, Jackson? Why? You got what that tells you this? Come on, a little faith between us. This is getting us nowhere.
On the contrary, Mr. Baddins, I have already told you a great deal, and you're the only one of the two of us benefiting from this conversation so far. I am willing to tell you more, but you cannot blame me if I wish to keep a few details to myself. Out of good faith.
Good point. Hell, there are times I don't even trust myself. Fair enough. The singing sword is actually called the Sword of Acryonis. Jackson began feverishly jotting down notes on his memo pad, hanging on every syllable coming out of my mouth. I probably could have blurted out Gabby's batting average in 28, and he would have made note of it. What you have to understand about the Sword of Acryonis, I continued, is that it's actually part of a collection of talismans. He paused and looked at me incredulously.
Talismans?
Ain't that just like the government? Still, I couldn't ignore the reality that the feds were now officially in the middle of my investigation. These boys at the War Department probably had eyes and ears everywhere. Between Jackson's operation and the Treasury Department keeping an eye on Al, Bugs, and their boys, Chicago was now a regular secret policeman's ball. Without trying, these government suits would trip over each other. Talk about making my job tough. The sword itself is more of a ceremonial piece than a weapon, and there is an inscription along its blade. I chose not to tell him it was Elvish. That would just make this chat even more complicated. The inscription is part of its prophecy that only the mild and meek can wield it.
So what if someone strong were to handle it?
Jackson looked up from his memo pad, unable to mask his curiosity.
I don't mean someone strong in build, mind you. Let's say someone strong in stature, like, say...
the current Commander-in-Chief of the United States Armed Forces? Humans are so thick. They really feel entitled to everything, even when it comes to wielding talismans like the singing sword. I'm not going to lie to you about this, Jackson. I don't know all the details of what it can do. I do know that armies following the chosen wielder went unchallenged. Those who did challenge the sword fell before it, subject to the whims and darkest desires of the blessed that wielded it. Something to that effect, you know? The prophecies from my parts tend to sound a lot like that Revelations chapter. I turned from the window to glance out to Miranda and the little party in my waiting area. Miller was fighting to stay on his feet while Doc Roberts gave him a quick eyesight check. Never saw one guy try so hard to keep his peepers on a single finger. I turned back to Jackson and added, as far as what would happen if our man Hoover got a hold of the sword, I can't say for sure. When wizards and mages perform their hocus-pocus...
Wizards and mages? You're not serious about that, are you, Mr. Baddins?
Ask your partner. He just found out firsthand just how serious these charms and curses on weapons can get. I could see the denial building in his eyes. With a shrug, I turned my eyes back to the rainwater slowly running down the glass in front of me. If you really want to understand what you're dealing with, first, you have to open your mind to the oddball and just plain weird. And you might be able to hang on to your sanity, Jackson. When wizards and mages work their charms and or curses over a talisman, be it a ring, a gauntlet, sword, or even a battle axe. We both looked over to Miller, now taking a seat next to Miranda's desk as she came in from outside the hallway with ice pack in hand. You probably won't know the results of their work until it's all said and done. You just don't know for certain what will happen in the long run. I've had that battle axe long enough to know how it reacts to other people's touch. Your boy out there was just a little too eager to answer Uncle Sam's orders. Best to look carefully before crossing any unknown streets. Agreed, Mr. Jackson? Gently placing the pipe on my desk, I hopped back into my chair while Jackson went out to take a closer look at his partner. Evidently, Miller was already returning to his former charming self, snatching his fedora out of Miranda's hand and grunting at Jackson. Guess that was War Department code for, I'm okay. Jackson then turned back toward me. The size of this suit rivaled some kings I've stood before, but even with the Roscoe resting snug and secure in his shoulder holster and the War Department covering his expenses, I refused to forget that it was my tax dollars that paid for his cheap-ass suit and morning Java. If you're waiting to find out why I'm looking into the singing sword alongside you, I told him through the now open window, that ain't gonna happen. You saw the name on the door, and I made it clear to you when you got here. My clients remain private. If you can spare the manpower, maybe you'll find out whom I'm working for. That's going to be the only way you're going to find out anything else from me. Jackson gave me a nod.
We'll be in touch, Mr. Baddins.
He spoke flatly. I'm a detective, I replied in the same tone. Kind of figured that one out. He was almost out of the door when I spoke up again. Hey, Jackson, Before you go, I do have one more thing I want to know. Just a little detail that's gnawing at my craw." Jackson turned back, more out of curiosity than courtesy.
"Yes, Mr. Baddings?"
"You said you intercepted that message concerning the Smithsonian folk a month before the murders." I paused for a moment, making sure I had his undivided attention. "Tell me, why didn't you warn them?"
"We needed to find out how real this threat was and how far they would be willing to carry out orders."
I nodded slowly. "And you can sleep with those deaths on your conscience?" Jackson's expression didn't change as he turned to join Miller by Miranda's desk. Miller gave me a final cold stare before tossing Miranda his ice pack. Then they both made to leave, the glass that used to be my window grinding and crunching underneath their steps. Suddenly, Jackson whirled around and retrieved his notepad, flipping a few pages forward and reading the notes there.
"Where exactly is—"
He paused for a moment and slowly formed the word
Acryonis?
"It's a small town in Missouri, about an hour outside of Shelbyville," I replied. "We're very traditional in our ways when it comes to folklore and all that, so that's how I come across stuff like this," I said, motioning to my weapons. "It's an out-of-the-way sort of place, so you may find it hard to come across it on a map."
"Shelbyville."
"Missouri," I confirmed. "I could have told you I am from a realm of wizards, dragons, and trolls, and that I got here by slipping through a portal of oblivion." With a gruff laugh, I added, "That's about as believable as a division of the War Department devoted to the study of magic talismans, huh?" He didn't say anything as his notepad closed with a barely audible. A few seconds later, my office door closed behind them quietly. With old Doc Roberts still packing up his bag, I waited until Uncle Whisker's pals were out of earshot before loosing a long, heavy sigh. The feds. Shit. I really could have done without this new addition to the roster. Then again, if what Jackson said were true, gangsters weren't the only ones on a quest for the Singing Sword and its fellow talismans.
"As you are a civilian and unfamiliar with the aftermath of a war, Mr. Baddings."
I grimaced at the bitterness forming again in my mouth. Jackson didn't know just how familiar this citizen was with the aftermath of losing a war. Take it from me, when all you have left is pride, you can build a lot more than a nation. When we lost the first war of the races, the elves introduced doctrines forbidding dwarves from holding assemblies. But our newly appointed figurehead, and he was barely that, called his court in secret. And could this guy talk? This emperor was a wordsmith, and he appealed to the Griffinos Empire's glory days. Word passed from family to family, and slowly we regrouped. 25 years later, the elves decided in closed council to fully restore our emperor's power, as a gift to us for serving their royal house so diligently over the years. It was really their way of admitting defeat when our underground's blockades and declining productivity in their mines had starved out their supply lines. With the guidance of our emperor, armed only with motivation, we had ultimately won the war against the elves without swinging an axe. Yeah, Jackson, I thought as I paid Doc Roberts for the visit, I know all about war, its aftermath, and that one guy who can make a difference. I glanced at the clock. Sergio had asked me to come around lunchtime to try on the tux he was stitching together for me. In answer to Miranda's uncertain look, I fired off a quick wink and returned to what was now a semi-private office. Through the curtain of rainwater running slowly against the window pane, I watched Miller and Jackson cross the street and climb into a parked car that had two others in the front seat. My moment in front of the window turned into 5 minutes, and 5 minutes turned into 10. Apparently, they weren't making plans to leave anytime soon. Guess I'd be taking the back door to Sergio's.